Well, one of the things that right before we started recording was this idea of more of a neutral energy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I've think back to a lot of poor decisions in my life, and they all had something in common, and it's heightened levels of emotionality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, it could be a good emotion or a bad emotion. Heightened levels just means overly happy, happy, angry, sad, um, grief, right? All any of the emotions.
Mm-hmm.
But when I look back at you know, and I don't want to make it sound so easy like good and bad because everything is a spectrum, right? There's decisions that may not necessarily have been bad, but they weren't necessarily good. It's a
Right.
spectrum. But when I think of poor decisions, right, like the bottom, you know, scale on 1 to 10, 1, 2, and 3.
Yep.
Those are poor decisions.
Mm-hmm.
4, 5, and 6 are mediocre. 7, 8, 9, 10, good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I know that I want to work on is decision making, right? How do we make better decisions so that we have more? We land in the world of 4, 5, 6, and then have a few 7, 8, 9s, and as few as possible 1, 2, 3s. And the
Mm-hmm.
common denominator that I keep coming to when I think about all the poor decisions that I've made in my life has been heightened emotionality.
Yep.
And that could be anger, grief, shame, guilt, all those low level emotions. But at the same time, I mean, if you're in a heightened state of love, sometimes we make poor decisions,
Very true.
right? So it goes both ways. So something that I've personally been working on lately is getting myself to neutral. And I always think about like driving a manual car, right? And you know what happens when you drive manual. Even if you're going down the road, sometimes it's just you're cruising, you go around a corner. What do? You kind of put it in neutral, right? It
Yep.
doesn't need to be in a gear right now. Pull it out, put it in neutral. You know, dude, I'm just gonna leave it in neutral. Now let's go into this curve. What do I need? Do I need a little more giddy up? I'm gonna drop down the second. Do I need to just come out and merge to a lane that's already existing? I could just leave it in third,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if I want to go down the second, I can get more RPMs. I can really pull into that corner, right? So there's an interesting metaphor there of getting to neutral, right? And it brings me to something to get your take on too, which is stoicism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's personally my development journey over the past only about 7 or 8 years in continuing to build and grow started with discovering stoicism.
One hundred
It didn't
percent.
start with the Bible. It started with stoicism.
Mm-hmm.
It started with Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius,
Yes, sir.
and meditations
Mm-hmm.
before getting to the Bible, before getting to self-help books.
Right.
And that was some of the original stuff. And what do they say? The stoicism, stoicism, stoicism. And it's interesting in my personal life how that's come full circle, where I've gone back to the cornerstone. What is that? What it's called? The cornerstone. You know when they're putting up a building and there's one like
Right.
boulder they put up first.
Yeah, they call it the cornerstone. It's like this is a yeah. I know.
Is that what that's what it is, right?
Uh-huh.
Cornerstone. I think
Yeah.
there's a name for it. I
Yeah.
think it's cornerstone, but I'm not 100% sure.
No, yeah. Some churches are called cornerstone.
Yeah, and I'm
It's
thinking
like
like
a very important stone.
right. It's like one brick,
Stone.
right? And
it
it's
symbolizes a lot.
and I think it's cornerstone. But my point is that it's interesting how that's coming back around. How ancient wisdom,
Oh yeah.
and it's put me back into that place of neutrality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I can make as many decisions as possible from a place of neutrality, the odds will go up from having 4, 5s, and 6s, 7, 8, 9s, fewer 1, 2, 3s, and hopefully as many 10s as possible.
Very true. And it almost had. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. A lot of points you made. I wrote down quite a bit. And one thing I'm thinking about is, you can cut once and measure a few times or whatever it was, or you can measure a million times and cut. What's it called? Measure 10 times,
Measure
cut
twice,
once.
cut once.
Measure, yeah, something
Yep,
like that.
yep,
Or measure once and cut 10 times.
Yeah,
Right? Measure once, cut 10 times, or measure 10 times, cut once.
Yeah,
right? And it's just about accuracy with decision making. And it's all about, we all want to make sure that we're making the right decisions. And sometimes when life either goes left or right, all we can do is just have the awareness to sit back and analyze, okay, so did this get me to my projected outcome? What was my desired outcome? And it's something that you said about that. The big piece of it was like the emotionality. And emotion is always not a disruption of the neutral system, but it is a change up. It's a change of pace, right?
Mhm.
Some emotions are good, some emotions are bad. Negative emotions can be disruptive, and that's
Mhm.
probably why most of the negative emotions are found on that chart, that chart of awareness
Yeah.
or consciousness under neutrality. Because if it's something that is taking you away from that in a negative standpoint to a lower vibration, then it might be a disruption, right?
Mhm.
But a lot of times, I think the thing about getting to neutrality is we're always constantly going to be getting to it. And so I think that's the task, is how do we get to neutrality consistently? How? And also being more efficient. It's like almost, I think about a golfer with a
Mhm.
golf swing. The whole point about being, whether you're a good golfer or a bad golfer, is how many strokes it takes you to get the ball in that hole.
Yep. Yep.
Right? The better you are, the less strokes it takes you to get the ball in the hole. So I think the better that we come with controlling our balance of our emotions,
Mhm.
meaning how quickly we can get to neutrality. I think everybody's going to be knocked out of it
Yeah.
because that's just life.
Mhm.
But I think the importance there is having the skill set and the ability to be aware, like, okay, where am I at right now? All right. What am I in? What are my emotions telling me? Am I a little rattled? Am I a little anxious? Am I a little fearful?
Mhm.
Like what am I feeling right now? And being aware of where you are, not letting it tell you where you are, not being controlled by our emotions. That's when we get in trouble. That's when we're controlled by our emotions, where I'm away and I'm just going to act on how I'm feeling. And it's like, well, one thing that sparked in my mind when you were speaking was, what is the desired outcome? All right, because you have the poor decisions, you have
Sure.
the good decisions, and the focus now is how can we make more efficient, good decisions on the scale 7, 8, 9, and 10 level decisions.
Mhm.
So that's our outcome. And so what I would want to think about is, how can I now have the awareness to know that it's not wise to make decisions, especially not critical decisions, if I'm not in a balanced state.
Mhm.
And so almost allowing ourselves to pause before we make that choice,
Yep.
before we make that decision. And sometimes I practice that now with just knowing a little bit more. It's like, okay, can I trust myself right now? Because sometimes I think the lack of certainty
Mhm.
might be a symbolism that we have too much distractions going on in our balance,
Mhm.
right? And so it's like, okay, well, I kind of want to do this, kind of want to do that. And as soon as we kind of calm, relax, and get to a neutral state,
Yeah.
we get a lot more clarity.
Yep. Yep.
We get a lot more clarity. That's why when people go on a run, when they go on a long walk, when
Yep.
they put themselves in a state to where now they can focus and clear out their mind and
Meditation,
distractions,
right?
meditation,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so sometimes the distractions aren't always external. It's not everything else. Sometimes it's the internal distractions.
They'll
Like drummed
I
up.
think the majority of the time it's internal, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Uh-huh.
It's an interesting story, and I'll probably butcher the story, but later on I'll Google it to try and find it. But Marcus Aurelius,
Mhm.
there's a famous story where he said to a jeweler, he said, "Make me a ring that every time I look at, when I'm happy, it's going to bring me back to neutral. And every time I'm sad, it's going to bring me back to neutral."
Mm.
Right? So exactly what you just said.
Mhm.
The Stoics have been talking about this for 2,500 years.
Oh yeah.
And he said to him, and he put it on a ring so
Wow.
that every time I look at it, I'm going to find exactly what it is. And
I love
I
it.
might butcher it, but it's you're going to die. Right? Right? So it's because when you're happy, it can bring you back down.
Yep.
But when you're sad,
It can bring you
it
back
can
up.
bring you back up. Like,
That's
listen, I'm
crazy.
going to die anyway.
That's funny.
And he came to him and he presented the ring, and the king looked at it. He was like, wow, okay, all right, got it. And there's another story where reportedly Marcus Aurelius would have a slave follow him around. So whenever he was praised, the slave would say, "You're just a man." And whenever he was criticized, he would say, "You're just a man."
Mm.
And what it would do is it would bring him back to neutral.
Mhm.
Right now, where we're challenged is in no other time in human history have we been able to access dopamine
Right.
to get us into higher states. Whether or not they're artificial higher states is not the question. They probably are.
Right.
I think the vast majority of elevated emotional states in people are dopamine induced,
Mhm.
and it's dopamine created inefficiently,
Mhm.
right? So I think that that's something to be said there. So at no other time in history have we had access to be able to get ourselves to that point,
Mhm.
right? Now, we consider ourselves, without using that, how can I equip my mind to get me to different places when I'm identifying where I am on the map?
Mm.
How do I GPS myself? Now, the lower emotion, everyone has been saying this,
Mhm.
you know, anyone from a Tony Robbins to anyone that's ever been in any development space.
Yep.
When you're feeling in a lower state, what pill do you take?
Gratitude.
Exactly. You take the gratitude pill. That can get you, the thought is to get you to neutral. Now, it's not always easy.
No.
You're grieving the loss of a loved one.
For sure.
You're grieving the end of a relationship. You're feeling, you know, you're in a place of guilt and shame based on decisions that you've made, based on inaction, right? Because sometimes what can happen is there can be a cycle. I know that I got caught in that for a long time, a cycle of inaction. A lot of people don't realize that one of the 7 deadly sins that God hates us most for is sloth, inaction. It's a sin. No one ever thinks about that.
For sure.
If they would ever say list the sins, it's like lust, envy, greed. But not doing stuff is a sin.
Yeah.
Not doing what you're supposed to do is a sin, right? And get you fired from your job.
They don't speak about that often.
They don't speak about that. So now the question is, what do you need to do to kind of get you to that point? And then that comes back to the pill of gratitude. To say, all right, well, this is going to get me back to neutral. I'm not doing this. I'm not going to the gym. I got to be thankful. I got these legs right here. I got this blood pumping in my body. I got to think about someone that got a horrible message last week that a loved one died in a car accident, that, you know, took a stray bullet and is going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of their lives.
Right.
I mean, it can sound harsh, but sometimes by putting our mind in that harsh environment can snap us back into the fact and say, wow, the room that we're sitting in is only 80 degrees. This isn't that hot when you mentally put yourself in the desert, if only for just a minute.
True.
You put yourself in the desert for a minute, it's 110 degrees, there isn't any water in sight. You come back to that 80-degree room, 77-degree room, and it is
appreciate it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
It feels great.
For real.
This is a great room I'm in right now.
Seriously.
So how do we create those inner activities when we're identifying those emotions? And how do we get to neutral when those things are happening, especially when there are people in front of us that are the cause of those emotions? Because it's gonna happen. If anyone has ever been to the DMV, we know that emotions can arise based on other people's actions towards us and around us. Okay?
100%.
Now, if we can feel that rising up, like, oh, time to take a gratitude pill. Time to take a gratitude pill. Let me throw a little motivation pill in there too, right? Like, what pill do I need to get me to neutral?
True.
And I think that that's very important. And then when we're in a heightened state, you know, that's a little bit challenging to say, why would I want to bring myself down from that place of love and joy and excitement? And because understanding that it may not be a bad place to be, it just might not be the best place to make decisions. That's all that we're saying there, right? So how do you get yourself to neutral? And that could be a little bit of a bitter pill to say, whatever happens comes to an end. Let me get myself to neutral. What decision do I need to make? Now, the skill in all of that I continue to work on to this day, which is one of the reasons that I'm building Modern Day Don and the community, and because Modern Day Don is just as much about the journey that I'm on personally being documented. With all the conversations with you, with all the other men, I learned just as much from those conversations that's making me a better head of the family. So something I've come to realize is that decision making, quick decision making,
Mhm.
is key when it comes to long-term success.
Mhm.
And any person that is successful, and I don't want to just categorize entrepreneurship as success,
Right.
right? I think the the social media and media in general has absolutely glorified this idea of entrepreneurship and the entrepreneur as the modern idol.
Mhm.
And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that there are an exceptional amount of successful people that are engineers,
Mhm.
that are physicians,
Mhm.
that are teachers, that are mechanics,
Mhm.
right? They're very successful in what they do. When we think about success and we think about someone that has been successful, the one common characteristic that I've noticed is quick decision making.
Mhm.
Quick decision making. It doesn't mean that they've always made the right decision, but what I've found is that they're able to make quick decisions. And because of that, they're able to make more decisions, right? There's an old
Yeah.
parable that says there was a pottery class, and the professor divided the class up into two groups.
Yep.
And the one group, their assignment was over the course of the class,
Mhm.
whether it be a month, whatever it was, your job is to make the one perfect pot. So as we learn and continue to learn, keep working on that one pot. And then the other group, they were instructed to just make as many pots as possible. Keep making pot after
Just
pot after pot, pot after pot.
I don't even think about it.
Don't even think about it. Pot after pot. Every day you're making pots. You're making 2, 3. It breaks, throw it away. Don't worry about it.
Right.
You have to make the one perfect pot. You have to make as many pots as possible. Who do you think had the better pot at the end? Right? The group that just kept firing the gun.
Right.
They made decisions. They pivoted. They made changes. So the characteristic that I've noticed, excuse me.
Pleasure.
So the characteristic I've noticed around successful people is the fast decision making,
Mhm.
being able to make decisions quickly. Now, something I've also noticed is them being able to compartmentalize the emotion at the time. That goes back to what we were saying from a neutrality perspective. They were able to get themselves to neutral, make a decision, and move on.
Mhm.
What that also means is that they're able to fend off the emotions of bad decisions.
Correct.
That's very challenging to do.
Very.
For me, and for most people, most likely.
Mhm.
We tend to harp on bad decisions. We tend to harp on poor decisions.
Dwell,
we tend to
yeah.
harp on our decision-making capabilities,
Right.
which then keeps us from doing what? Pulling the trigger.
Right.
Keeps us from what? Making more pots.
100%.
Right? So with this characteristic, I thought to myself, okay, if they're making 20 decisions in the time that I'm making one, how do I get better at decision making? Right? How do I put myself in the place where there's more decisions to make? And how do I skew the results in my favor?
Mhm.
And the answer that I kept coming up with was neutrality.
Yeah.
Was getting myself into a place of limited emotionality, right? You can't have no emotion, but limited emotionality to be able to make those decisions. And that leads us back to a cornerstone of our development, you as a man, me as a man, which is stoicism.
Yeah.
Because that's the point. Getting to that stoic philosophy of, hey, you know what? You're going to die, just so you know. You're merely a grain of sand
going to happen
on the beach.
Yep.
In the greater scheme of the world.
Yep.
While you're here, at the very least, make a mark. At the very least, impact some others that are around you. At the very least, create something that may outlive you.
Big time.
So that's what drives me to build the modern day Don movement, which is just as much about learning and documenting my process. And if there are other men along the way that are able to get value from that process, then maybe I've made a little bit of an impact in the world. And as I continue to build the legacy that I want to leave behind for my family, hopefully that'll be a part of it.
No, I mean, you said a lot of great points there. Big time, big time, big time. It's just, quick decision making is very important. And I think it's important to understand how to command your state. To your point about some of the people that you've been influenced by and that you spoke with and the stories that we've read around great high achievers, they didn't have a way of being able to command their state. That way they can continue to make those quick decisions. But to your point, a lot of times if we get lost in guilt and all this type of stuff, and I think guilt is a big one that gets brushed under the rug a little bit because we only associate it to maybe like large happenings. But even the smallest things of, like you said, dwelling too long on a past decision, even something as much as missing an exit. You know what I mean? Even as something as little as, saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, right? We go through our day with all these little micro moments that can breed these different energies, right? And take us off track of being in that neutral state. And I think that gets us out of alignment with the quality of the decisions that we're making. So even though we're making them, whether we're making them slow, whether we're making them quick, it's about the quality. And I think the more efficient you become, like a sharpshooter, through skill and through just repetition of like going and taking action and like analyzing your approach and how you make decisions, and making sure before you make a decision, you put yourself into a certain headspace so that now you have a proven result of, okay, when I get in this type of headspace, when I meditate for 20 minutes, when I do this, when I have my list of 10 grateful things, right? Now I know that my decision making yields better results. So now you have a program, you got a process, you have a implementation, a system that you can do that helps you control some of those external factors as well as the internal distracting factors that get in the way of the quality of our choices. So then a lot of times it's not necessarily whether or not the person actually has the skill, right, to shoot enough baskets to make it in the bucket. You might be able to shoot really well, but if a lot's on your mind, you don't know how to focus. You don't know how to, be contested and still focus on the basket. You got to learn how to eliminate a lot of those mental, emotional, spiritual, external, physical distractions, right? That has to do with decision making. So I think that was a great point. A couple other points I was going to make was outside of just gratitude, you can kind of look at gaps and gains. I think a lot of people have a hard time grabbing hold to like how to command gratefulness, and thankfulness on every little thing. And you can just look at, hey, on a practical sense, what's the gap and what's the gain of whatever it is that you're doing right now in the life. A lot of times we get focused and build habits and behaviors on looking at gaps, right? And that becomes something a way of operating. We just become everything we look at. Oh yeah, but it could be this. Oh yeah, but it could be that. And we don't think that it programs us, right? Or we can retrain ourselves to look at the gain in something like, yeah, this is that, but this is the good thing about it. This is the benefit about it. This is what positive can come out of this situation, right? Yeah, the car might be making noise, but it's a car. You know what I mean? And I'd be worse off without the car, right? Yeah, you know what I mean? The house could be bigger, but it's a house. You know what I mean? And I'd be worse off. I remember when I didn't have a house. I remember, any little thing that you can do just to look at the gain of what you have is also a form of triggering yourself into gratitude. And the last point I'll make about feelings is a lot of times that we have the wrong mindset on how to judge and analyze and understand feelings, because you say people, well, why did you do that? Because I feel. If you lead with, I did it because I felt, that already kind of shows that you're outside of that stoic mindset. You're outside of that neutral state when you say, well, I felt this way. I feel a way, right? It's like, okay, well, how do you want to feel? What outcome do you want? And I think just leading with that, and I know I try to tell myself and prompt myself that when I'm at a state of conflict or anything or critical decision-making process, is what outcome do I want to happen? What is my desired outcome? At the end of all of this, where do I want this to go? And I think if we think about it like that, that'll take us out of a feeling. So no matter what you feel, how you feel in that moment, your outcome is going to stay the same. You want this result. Right? And so whether you're mad, sad, happy, whatever it is, you need to get to a state to where whatever you do next is going to present you with this result. And I think that can help us get out of the track of the decisions that we made in the past and anything like that won't reflect positively on us getting closer to the result. Feelings included. If that's not helpful, that's not going to help us get one step closer.
And what you said, to kind of wrap up that whole segment that we did, was, you mentioned something, you said, because I felt like it. And who says that when you ask them why they did something? Children.
Right.
So here's the lesson, right? The lesson there is the book tells us to be more childlike. Now, let's go back to what we talked about before, which was quick decisions, quick forgiveness, right? Who's very good at that? Children.
Right.
You ever seen a kid be like, oh, I want this. You know what? No. I want this. I want this.
Right.
And have you ever seen, two little kids, your brother or sister, they get into a fight, or just two best friends, and they're two little 4-year-olds, and they're rolling, you hit my head.
Right.
5 seconds later, they're like, hey, you want to go up the swing? And they're like, yes.
Right.
Right? How quickly they're able to forgive is phenomenal. They haven't been tainted by the world quite as much as a lot of us have been, and jaded by and beaten up by.
That's true.
With all due respect, we all have.
That's true.
Now, so then the question there is, we know that a lot of the decisions are based on emotion, because when you ask a kid and you say, hey, why did you do that? Because I felt like it. Right? So now if we have adults that are answering that question, now we at least know where to go back to. We can go to that childhood and say, why are you making decisions with this kind of mentality? And even as you're working with children, it's like, okay, how do we get to neutral as you start making those decisions for what you want? So I think that's a huge epidemic we have, is people that are making decisions in their emotion, which is more childish, versus people that are actively seeking, actively learning, actively engaging with the world, actively being adventurers, actively communicating, right? Being the active of the world versus being the passive of the world, because that's been, that's been hidden, and that's been put down in their lives to a certain extent. So I think there's a lot of lessons there. So when you say, oh, I did it because I felt like it, or when someone says that to you, it's because that's what children say.
Yeah.
But now, how do we still harness quick decision making, childlike curiosity, while not making decisions from the childish side in our feelings? And that goes back to how we started the whole conversation, which was getting to neutral.
Oh, yeah.
Getting to neutral. And that's something that children don't have the capability for just yet.
Right.
Because they don't understand what the light bill means. They don't understand what the heating bill means. They don't understand what the mortgage payment is.
Right.
So it's tough for them. It's tough to try to instruct them based on that. So it has to be done